If you've been paying attention to this program over the last few months, you may have seen a theme, right? How are our children affected by the COVID vaccine mandates or the COVID vaccine itself? How are our children affected by having to wear masks for years without social interaction, seeing people's faces, especially if they're small children, developing and learning language skills? How was learning school from home at a laptop on a kitchen table instead of actually interacting with teachers and fellow students? How does that affect them? What about the curriculum that's being inflicted upon our kids in our government run schools? What about transgender policies? What about encouraging transgender transitions without parents knowing about it? We could go on and on. The point is, if you've been paying attention, you know that the end result here is the kids are not all right. And that's actually a theme of the book written by our next guest, one of our pals. She's the co author, along with the great Karol Markowicz, of the brand new book out next week. It's called Stolen Youth. She's Bethany Mandel. Bethany, my friend, thanks for joining us and thanks for writing this book.
Thank you. It's actually out in March, so you're gonna have me again in March.
Oh, you're right. I said next week, but it's next month. Good. We're going to
Yeah.
get it. I can't wait to read it. And then we'll really get in depth after I get a chance to read it. But people can pre-order it now when they should. Did
Mhm.
I hear all the bullet points to sort of set up the thesis of the book?
Yeah, and it's so hard for me to succinctly talk about what this book is about, but you hit it very well. There's basically an all fronts attack on children and childhood and families, and it comes from every angle. On the transgender stuff, that's a huge chapter that we have in there. That's probably our biggest chapter. But there's also the sexualization of childhood, not just related to gender issues, and issues related to mental health and physical health, with the American Academy of Pediatrics. And COVID is just the first block of that. But
Yeah.
there's so many aspects of it. And Carol wrote a fantastic opening piece, sort of talking about the Marxist history of when they've tried to indoctrinate and capture ideologically an entire culture and civilization, they've started with the children. That's exactly what's happening here.
I think one of the insidious things about the arguments made by those who promote all of this tinkering with our kids is that it's based on science. From the
Yeah.
transgender thing to, I mean, they try to say critical race theory is a scientific model or some sort of philosophical theory, all the way down the line. And yet, science requires actual testing and proof and data. And I've never seen that. Have you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny because the folks who are doing this, they're the ones who have that sign on their front lawn, "In this house we believe in science." But on the issue of transgender sort of stuff they ignore the science of evolution, of biology, of of everything.
Yeah.
The science is very clear. You cannot change a man into a woman. If you dig up a skeleton from 3,000 years ago, you can immediately identify if it's a man or a woman based on the hips. And there's no denying that you can't change genders.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what they try to claim.
Well, and they try to claim it and also introduce it to children before they hit
Yes.
puberty. Then they prescribe puberty blockers and say it's temporary, and
Yeah.
yet we know it's not because it'll affect
Yeah.
fertility rates on down the line. Uh,
Hmm.
and yet, I mean, I've seen what's happened to you, Bethany, in your writing and in your social media presence when you start to raise objections. You're a bigot and you're going to lead
Yeah.
children to suicide. This is
Yeah.
outrageous.
Yeah. And the studies that conclude that children who are not granted gender transitions commit suicide are incredibly flawed. The data is just not there, and it's manufactured in order to sort of allow them to continue to press these talking points. But
Yeah.
there is no science here. There's no data that indicates that children are better off, and quite the opposite. Children overwhelmingly, when they self-identify as transgender, they detransition later on. But if we're letting them socially transition and, god forbid, biologically transition, those are changes that are that's why Abigail Schreier's book about it is called
Yeah.
Irreversible Damage, because it's irreversible.
The book is called Stolen Youth, on sale now, but it's going to come out in March. And I don't want to get too bogged down in the transgender issue because we could do a whole hour on
Yeah.
it. The social experiment with our children during COVID, I think, really needs to be
Yes.
revealed. I mean, you talk about science. I'm old enough to remember that About a week before our kids were forced home to learn all of their lessons for 2.5 years on laptops and tablets, we were told that the worst thing we can do is put our kids in front of a screen. Remember,
Yep.
screen time was the big concern that
Mhm.
all of the scientists had, and
Yep.
they just forgot that immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and now there's whispers of it back, and it's kind of like our memories are not that short, guys. We remember when you pushed our kids onto screens for years. There's a new study that just came out that children under 1 year of age, if they spend more than 2 hours on a screen, every benchmark of their development is impacted. And as if their first birthday is this magical turning point in which they could go from not having screens at all to 8 hours a day is totally acceptable. And we knew that it wasn't. And I wrote a column for the New York Post about that in 2020, and it was pretty much ignored. It was on the front page of the New York Post.
Hmm.
But that's exactly one of the chapters Carol tackles. But there's so many aspects of how the left is trying to indoctrinate and destroy our children.
Yeah. Bethany, the title of your book haunts me, Stolen Youth, because
Yeah.
these are years that kids never get back. I know it's a cliche,
Yep.
but there's a reason why it's a cliche. It's true. And I
Yeah.
wonder when kids aren't dumb, they're going to remember this and they're going to recognize when they're older. I worry about kids looking at us, their parents, and saying, "How did you let this happen?"
They should. I hope they do. I mean, that's part of why I worked so hard during COVID, because I wanted to be able to look my kids in the eye and say, I did everything in my power. And little things like I fought the Smithsonians and spoke to the congressman who was on their facilities board about dropping the masks. Like I took it
Mhm.
from every single angle. But this book, Stolen Youth, is not just about COVID. And I think COVID was a spotlight on how we're treating children and what we're doing to childhood, but it goes so much farther than just that. We're
Yeah.
stealing the youth of children through stealing their innocence. We're exposing them to ideas and content that they are just not developmentally ready for, especially when it comes to sexuality and transgender issues.
And
One of the most popular YouTube stars is named Miss Rachel, and she has a channel for 18-month-olds, and she introduces pronouns in those videos at 18 months old.
And Bethany, there is sort of a common denominator in all of these things that we're laying out here, and I think you've alluded to it in getting a hat tip to your co-author Karol Markowicz, and that is the state knows best for our kids.
Yes.
In every single one of these incidents that we're pointing out, it's the state intruding on the relationship between a parent and a child from the perspective of, oh, no, no, don't believe that these are your children. It's the
Mhm.
collective's children. And frankly, we know
Yeah.
better than you.
Yeah. The early sort of title that Carol and I wanted was Take Your Village Off My Child. Instead of Stolen Youth, that's what we were going to call it. And it's disturbing when Carol sort of breaks down the historical 360 overview of, this is the history of Marxism when it comes to children. This is something they've always tried to do. And Eric Erickson's famous saying, "You will be made to care," is absolutely true when it comes to our children, because there's already court cases that Child Protective Services has investigated parents who won't go along with their children's gender transition and gender
Mhm.
identity. You can't adopt a child, you can't foster a child, and these are the building blocks of what they're trying to do to capture our children if we don't consent to all of this stuff. And it doesn't stop there, and it won't stop there. And that's why parents really need to pay attention, and why we wrote Stolen Youth in the first place.
Well, it's a powerhouse duo. And if I know you're writing well enough, and I think I do, this isn't
Yeah.
just a lament and a complaint. This is also a call to action. I'm hoping there's
Yes.
some tools in this book about what we can do
Yep.
to fight back.
Yeah, there absolutely are. And Carol is the same way. We are of cut of the same cloth, which is why we decide to work together.
Yeah, yeah, annoying New York women. Again, they're the same.
Hmm.
They're all the
Yep,
same.
those loud New York Jews. We're here
I'm
for you.
glad you're on my side, though. Bethany Mandel, thanks for joining us. Always good to talk with you, and thanks for writing this book. It's on sale now for pre-order, and when it comes out first week of March, we'll definitely have Bethany back. Again, it's called Stolen Youth. More to come. You're watching O'Connor Tonight on Salem News Channel.